Now time for Dr. Ismail Mehr on our Newsmaker Hour. Good morning, Dr. Mehr.
Good morning. How are you?
Doing well, and yourself. I understand you worked a lot of this weekend.
We had some emergency surgeries over the weekend, as well as we've had, we have a few COVID patients that we're taking care of, but nothing overwhelming, and we're appreciative of the community's efforts and abiding by social distancing, so that we don't have an overwhelmed system in place, and that we can take care of everyone effective, efficiently, and appropriately.
Dr. Ismail Mehr, the anesthesiologist at St. James, head of the COVID-19 team at St. James. I want to get back to what you just talked about, social distancing, but first let's start out with your thoughts on reopening the economy.
Yeah, I think, that's above my pay grade, but I did like, and I think the president's task force plan of stage reopening in 3 phases. I think that was a very well thought out plan. It makes a lot of sense. I think the people on that task force, from the physicians to the economists, as well as the president, the vice president, I think there was a lot of thought put into it, and it seems like, I'm sure behind the scenes there was some give and take on things, but to us, as citizens of this country, what matters is what was the end result. And as a physician who understands the medical impact of this virus, I think the phase reopening makes sense, and I'm in agreement with that. It doesn't solve some of the economic problems right away, but it also doesn't prolong the economic fallout that we're having. And I'm first and foremost, I see that and recognize that, and I think it gives us a timeline to start bringing that back. I think the important thing, though, is some of the, maybe I wouldn't say a flaw in there, but the factor that's unknown is a lot of that reopening is based off of testing. Dr. Birx and Dr. Fauci made that pretty clear, is what states and what ability we have for testing there to understand it, so that certain states and areas can open up sooner maybe than others. There's still a huge shortage of testing. The criteria for who we can test is very stringent right now. If the federal government says, the testing is available for everyone who needs it, that's true. But there's the second part of it is you might have the capacity. You might have the capacity in terms of test kits, but do you have the capacity and all the reagents and the nasal swabs? All the things that go into actually doing the test. There's a huge shortages of that. So we're still seeing that, and that's why we can't just test everyone who has a fever and a cough right now. Unlike when you have strep throat or you have regular flu, you get a fever, you have a cough, you're not feeling good, you're feeling weak, you get tested for it. We've all been there. You get tested, oh, nope, you don't have the flu, or no, oh, yes, you have strep throat, here's some antibiotics, take it. We're not able to do that right now for this. So I think that will be a little bit of an unknown, but the plan is good. I think it's very staged. It'll take some time. I think certain states are going to be longer than others, but it's a road to reopening in a thoughtful process.
Dr. Mehr, if you'd repeat what you said the other day on the Thursday show when you talked about how the COVID-19 patients at St. James Hospital are in a different section than everybody else.
And we implemented this before we even had the sort of the surge, initial surge. I think now we're going about 3 weeks ago. We had implemented what we call the COVID, non-COVID entry points in the hospital. So if you trigger one of those questions that are taken in our triage area that you might potentially be having COVID or coming in with signs and symptoms very similar to COVID, you would go in through the COVID side, and those that come in for other things and they have nothing to do with COVID, and the triage questions don't trigger a concern. They come in through a separate side. The ER is separated that way. Even the floor, if you do need to be admitted, is completely separated in terms of which side you're on. We have an east and west sort of wing upstairs. So COVID is on one side, and the non-COVID patients are on the other. So I think it's important for everyone to understand is if you do have to come to the hospital, you're going to be safe. I can't tell you how many times an hour, things are being wiped down, and our environmental services staff is doing an amazing job keeping things clean. From providers, nurses, techs, everyone, we're all the proper PPE protocols are in place here, and I think we've done a tremendous job, and I think it shows that we haven't had staff getting infected with COVID here. There was a few cases very early on, I believe. But that was also before social distancing was enacted. So it's not certain if that was acquired in the hospital or from the community. My thought would be it's probably from the community. So I think that's kudos to the hospital and everyone doing a great job. That in-hospital transmission to staff or to other patients has been nil.
Talking to Dr. Ismail Mehr here on the Newsmaker show. Dr. Mehr, I wanted to bring this up. There's a doctor on TV, and he's written articles online. He's pushing a theory about immunity, and his theory is everyone needs to be exposed to the COVID in order for the whole country to build up an immunity. And I guess what this doctor is saying is it's okay if some people die as long as most people get immunity. How would you respond to that? You're on the front lines of this in Hornell. What would you say to that theory?
Well, I think before I get into, I haven't specifically seen this physician or commentator personally, but I know these theories are out there, and actually, I did see an article. It wasn't a physician. It was, a commentator who did some research on immunity, I believe. So first and foremost, I think people have to understand what immunity means. So the virus is known as an antigen, okay? So the virus is a foreign body. It's a foreign substance. It comes into our body, and this happens with all infections, all bacteria, everything. Comes into our body. This is droplet spread for this specific virus, gets into your upper airways, down into your lungs. So now the antigen or the foreign body is in your system. Medically, scientifically, the body's defense has a defense mechanism. We as humans, as our system, which is known as our immune system, what we do is we respond to anything that's not normal in our bodies in terms of like viruses, bacteria, things like that of infectious nature. And our body will now make antibodies. So think of antibodies as the body's own antibiotics. Okay, I'm really watering it down just to try to make everyone understand. So now our body is making antibodies against this antigen foreign body, which in this case is the COVID, and starts fighting that off. Now there's two types of antibodies. There's the first line defenders, okay, and then there's the second line, which remain after this virus, bacteria, foreign body has been defeated. The second line remain in your system for life. And anytime, again, you get exposed to that viral or foreign body, those antibodies, in theory, are there, and you don't get reinfected, to make it very sort of simple. Now, in COVID-19, we're not sure 100% if you build immunity by antibodies, meaning do you have that second line antibodies that are your immunity antibodies? Do you develop that or not? Most viruses we know to date, to history, you do develop that. But we're not certain if you do it now with this one. So I think that's sort of one thing in that commentator's suggestions that could be flawed is that we don't even know if you develop immunity from this. There have been now a significant number of cases, I think from Singapore, South Korea, and maybe even China, where people who were known positives, known infected and sick with COVID recovered, and now many, many weeks later, I think even over a month or two, because some of them from China were very early on positive, are now sick again or testing positive again for COVID-19. So that's scary. That could mean there isn't necessarily autoimmunity, meaning your body doesn't have those second-line antibodies to keep you safe from reinfecting. Or it could mean is that it takes some time for those antibodies to develop, and that hasn't happened yet. Or it could mean the antibodies develop, but they only last very short term. Again, this is the second-line antibodies that are for immunity. So that's sort of the flaw in making that statement. But now let's take it on face value that, yes, everyone gets infected. Everyone, either they're asymptomatic, get really sick, but then they'll never get this again. That's possible. That does exist in immunology and virology. It happens. Chickenpox is a great example of it. You and I, when we were kids, there wasn't a chickenpox vaccine out there. What happened? We all got it, right? You play with the kids in the playground, someone had chickenpox or was getting them early on and you didn't see it, then you'd get it, and then you don't develop it again in life. Great example of herd immunity. That's the word you've all heard probably. Herd immunity, where you just let people get it and then you don't get it again. But using chickenpox as the example in comparison to COVID, chickenpox didn't make you so sick that you hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands of people needed to be hospitalized. Okay, that didn't happen with chickenpox. Number two, with chickenpox, those who got really, really sick and need to be hospitalized, 20% of them didn't get so sick that they needed to be in ICU care. And then 3% of them go on to die, correct? So you didn't have that. So that's why herd immunity works for certain viruses and certain diseases, because they're not as aggressive, they're not as virulent, and their transmission rate is not as high, which I've shared before, the R naught, or the rate of transmission. In COVID, you have a very high rate of transmission, or the R naught. It moves really fast from person to person. I mean, look at the number of people just in the NBA. I know a lot of us are sports fans, that there was one guy positive and played in a few games, and then look how many other people were sick or becoming positive. So it's a really high rate of transmission. I mean, just look at our country alone. I believe back in early March or late February, there was only 15 cases in the nation, and now we're at almost 700,000, right? I don't remember the latest numbers. So within 6 to 8 weeks, we went from 15 cases to 700-some thousand. And that's just the ones we've been able to test, right? And again, it's stringent testing guidelines because we're not able to test the asymptomatic people right now. So the transmission is really, really fast. And the other part of it is there's about a fatality rate in the is between, depending on which data you look at, is 2 to 3%. I think what I've seen is between 3 and 4, actually. 3.4 for the U.S. right now is a fatality rate. So that theory is not a good, conceptually not a good theory, because first of all, you want 330 million to get sick in the USA. 20% of them are going to need to be hospitalized. Out of that 20%, many of them need to be in the ICU, and then 3% of that is going to die. You guys could do the math. Take 330 million, multiply that by 20%. That's your hospitalizations, and then take and then take 3% of the total infected who are going to die potentially. So, yes, in theory, herd immunity is great. It works, but not for a virus that makes you so sick and has a mortality rate that's fairly significant. So hopefully that cleared it up. I hope I didn't confuse more people about it.
No, that was a great answer, Dr. Ismail Mehr. I'm going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. When we get back, we'll get Dr. Ismail Mehr to respond to what the critics say about social distancing. Stay with us.
The award-winning service department at Maple City Dodge is open. They're ready to pick up, sanitize, and return your vehicle after the work's done. The sales department is also available. Gary, Larry, Aaron, John, and Doug are working from home and making great deals, including 0% financing for 84 months and 90 days no payment on select 2019 and 2020 vehicles. Some restrictions apply. Contact Maple City Dodge to get in touch with your favorite sales guy. Maple City Dodge in Hornell. Proud to be serving you.
Back on Newsmaker. Dr. Ismail Mehr, what do you say to the critics of social distancing who say that social distancing is not keeping the COVID-19 numbers from increasing?
I would ask them what's making our difference. I mean, we've seen some of the flattening of the curve in New York State, in New York City. Actually, let me take that back. Not flattening, that we've hit the peak and we've plateaued. But we're not far away, in New York State from where we were as a state. I guess my question really to them is what's helping us bring those numbers down? I think, our county, Steuben County, and then even let's go to Hornell is a great example of it. We have 100-plus cases right in the immediate Hornellsville area, and that's with social distancing that we have that, Imagine if we didn't, how many we've had. We've had 19 deaths in the area from COVID. That's with social distancing. If we didn't, it'd be much more. So social distancing absolutely has been helping. The problem is it's the economic fallout and the tragic circumstances that small businesses and employers and even large corporations are facing, and that's really the tough thing to balance here. And I'll go back to the president's reopening phased plan. I think that's a good plan. As long as the White House task force stays with that and doesn't rush it through, and the plan itself doesn't rush things. There's a lot of things states have to meet, and it leaves it upon the governors to make those decisions. So I hope and pray that we have governors and 50 governors across the country, and Puerto Rico makes it 51 that make those decisions based on those guidelines, because I think they're well thought out. Social distancing is going to be the norm for a while, not as extreme as it is right now, I think. I went through the whole immunity thing. We don't even know about full immunity yet. We don't have a vaccine yet. So I think this is an extreme of social distancing, but life as we know it is not going to return that way for a while. I think we're going to be in between until we do develop a vaccine and it's validated and vetted that the vaccine provides 100% immunity or very close to it. I think that's going to be the game changer. So I think we all need to hope and pray that happens sooner than later. There's some talk out there that maybe by fall we'll have a vaccine. So I think that's very important that we get a vaccine.
Dr. Ismail Mehr, yesterday in his Sunday briefing, Governor Andrew Cuomo said New York State will undertake the most aggressive statewide antibody testing survey in the nation. It will tell us for the first time what percentage of the population actually had the coronavirus.
Yes, so this goes back to what we earlier were talking about in terms of immunity. So these are the antibody testing. Remember, the antibodies is the body's own antibiotics to really water it down response to an infection. So antibody testing is a blood test, and what that can allow for is two things. You could test for the first responder antibodies, which means yes, you are currently infected because you have the first response antibodies. And then also, and those, people who are presently infected. It's a much faster test than doing the nasal swabbing testing that we have right now. Number two is that same blood draw. If you would also tell, sirs, if we just mass tested everyone, that they have the second-line antibody and that they had been infected by this virus in the past, and now they develop antibodies. So, like I said early on, the second-line antibodies, we know that they're there, but we don't know how long it takes for them to come there, to develop, and how long they're effective, because there have been some reports of reinfection. Hopefully that's not that significant, and there is, autoimmunity to this virus. The problem is with these testing right now, many companies have put out antibody testing. I think the DNC, there's a private company in Rochester that's doing it as well. And what needs to be done and where the caution needs to be in place is, I think the government, the federal government did a nice job in relaxing the standards and the bureaucracy when it comes to producing a test for the FDA. So normally there's 1 million checks that you have to go through to even be able to put a test out in public. So we do need to get through some of the red tape, and I think we did a great job at that. But I think you also then have, some of the bureaucracy and checks and balances have to remain intact to ensure that it's a valid and appropriate test. So there's been a lot of false positives with some of the antibody testing that is out there, because there's many different types of these antibody tests by different companies. False positive means it says, yes, you've had coronavirus before. Remember here, I said coronavirus. I didn't say COVID-19. Coronavirus is a large family of viruses. So even going to the common cold. So false positive means you tested positive for the second-line antibodies, meaning, hey, Brian, you have immunity to it. But then you further look at it, and the positive was for coronavirus. It wasn't specific. It was sensitive. Sensitivity means it picks up coronavirus. Specificity means that it keys in on the actual specific COVID-19. So there's the worst thing you can do is tell people out there that you've tested positive for antibodies and you're good and go back and start, you don't need to social distance at all, but you never actually had it, right? So that's a concern. Also, false negatives could be just as concerning. So there's many tests, antibody testing out there. I think they've been brought out very quickly, which is good, but the bad is now it's going to take some time to vet out which ones are the better and best tests. So I think the governor's plan of doing aggressive serology testing, I think that's good, but I hope that we find the right test that is specific and sensitive at the same time, because not all of them have been that. And you can Google it and read about it, that, the serology testing, some of it is very sensitive but not very specific. Some are specific but not sensitive. And that we need to find a fine medium between that. But we're on the right path. I'm not knocking serology testing. Just want everyone to understand there's some flaws in there. And it's because for the speed we had to rush them out. And that's okay, because we do need to get them out there because we can't wait years for serology testing. But there's going to be some bumps in the road until that's perfected.
Dr. Ismail Mehr, down to the last 3 or 4 minutes, Facebook, what kind of comments are you seeing on Facebook?
Overall, there's a lot of discussion by many people about should we be masking when we're going out in public or should we not? I think I've seen some conversations about that, so I'll address that real quickly in a minute or two. So I think we have to remember is the president himself and the CDC have recommended that when going out in public that we wear a mask or a scarf or a cloth or a bandana around your mouth, something to cover your mouth, because it has been believed that even if you're not coughing or sneezing, if you are a carrier of the virus, again, I'm saying carrier, meaning you're not even sick, you don't even know you have it. You're asymptomatic, but you could be carrying it. And I think we all know that that's very, very common. Many people are just carriers. That's why we need the social distancing, because you don't have the symptoms, but you have the virus. And you can spread it to others just by some talking and regular stuff. You do make some of that virus airborne. So the reason for the president asking us and recommending, again, it was a recommendation to mask out in public, is because if you are an asymptomatic carrier, you won't transmit it. Hopefully you won't send it out to others. So I think what is happening in New York State is that, remember, out of the 50 states, we're the hardest hit state. Remember, out of you take all the countries in the world, I think we surpassed China and Italy and everyone else just as a single state. So I think the executive order from the governor was basically to help mitigate spread from asymptomatic carriers. Now, you can say, well, that's really only should be in New York City and New Rochelle and the very hard-hit areas. But it's before social distancing was enacted, we don't know how much of that is spread here. We know of the positive numbers in upstate New York, but we don't have any idea of how many people are asymptomatic. So I would say is let's not make it a political thing because you don't like the governor, and so I'm not going to listen to him, or I don't like the president, so I'm not going to listen to his recommendations. I think you have to come back to understand is that if you don't like the president and you're going to follow it because the governor now so said so, you should remember that actually our president asked us and recommended it earlier, many weeks ago, and vice versa. I think that's the reasoning behind it. Hopefully people understand it, that it's so that you mitigate spread if you're an asymptomatic carrier. And again, I think the guidelines are, if you're in heavy public areas and this and that, if you're just out for a walk with your dog and you're not even around anyone else, you don't necessarily, I think, from my interpretation, have to have the mask on. It's really, when you're socially interacting at the grocery store or out and about. And with that said, I'll share, at St. James, way before the president recommended wearing masking and before this executive order from Governor Cuomo, we enacted that here at St. James very early on, that anyone coming in has to wear a mask. All staff has to wear a mask throughout. And it wasn't because we're saying that it's protecting me when I wear a mask in the hospital. a regular surgical mask. It's not protecting me. It's protecting others around me that in case I'm a positive, I don't transmit it. I think that's what people may need to understand, and is that some people have misinterpretation. They think, well, I have no, I'm not going to get this virus. I probably already had it, or I'm good, and this and that. The mask isn't stopping you from getting it. It's from you spreading it in the event that you could be asymptomatic. So hopefully that explains some of that. I think it's important to keep in mind that the president, President Trump, recommended this many weeks ago, and it looks like now the governor just recently has taken that to the next level and asked for it as an executive order. I think it makes sense in a state where there's very high prevalence of this of positives, which means asymptomatics is going to be even much, much, much higher. So I think it's not a bad idea.
If you ever talk to him on the phone, it's not uncommon for him to say, hey, I got to run. The hospital's just calling me now to come in. Dr. Ismail Mehr, thanks so much for taking time out of your very busy schedule.
Yeah. Well, some of those calls are not just COVID. It's surgeries and things, too. So, we're still functioning here. We're still operating on emergencies, and we're busy. And to the community, I think it's important to know, if you're one final message is, if you're sick, what we are seeing is some people, they're scared of coming in. They don't have COVID symptoms. They're having other things going on. They're diabetic. They have renal problems. They have COPD. And they normally would come into the emergency room to be seen for something. But they're really worried now because they're like, I might get COVID when I go there. And then when they do finally come in, they're much, much sicker. These are your non-COVID people. So please remember, we're open. We're here to take care of you. We've separated things. We're going to keep you safe and protected because we don't want you getting so sick at home that then you have to come in by ambulance. And it's not even COVID related. It's something else that we could have taken care of you early on and kept you healthy. So remember that, please.
Dr. Ismail Mehr, it's always great speaking with you.
Thank you.